Hi again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Around the Town with Chuck. My name is Chuck Guglielmo, a weekly interview show where we talk with interesting people around the community. And today we have a very interesting guy. He was on Around the Town with Chuck before. I think he's my son. His name is Paul Guglielmo. Paul, thanks.
This is when you know Chuck's become desperate for guests, when his son is his guest. But this is nice. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I think you were here in January of maybe 2016 was the last time you were here. And you are going to be a daddy for the first time.
I'm very excited. My wife is due on October 29th, and it's our first, and it's your first grandchild, I believe.
Super excited.
Very
Cannot
excited.
wait.
So excited that he and my mom have been dropping hints for about 10 years or so about when do we get to become grandparents. So I'm happy to finally have made that happen, and I'm very excited. I'm a little bit nervous. I have the I guess probably natural first time parent jitters, because I just feel like I don't know some things. I don't know. How do you know? Well, I'll give you a good example. If my kid wants to eat candy, how do I know that that's not okay? Because the candy's delicious. I want to eat candy too. How do you just know to tell your kid they can't eat candy every day? I got to learn something.
Well, one advantage you already have is the 2 a.m. feedings will be all right for you because you're used to getting up at that time in the morning.
My alarm is set every day for 2 a.m. I do morning radio for a living, so it's definitely has become it's become my lifestyle, unfortunately. But yeah, the good news is I already get up in the middle of the night. Everyone warns you about becoming a parent waking up in the middle of the night. All set. I've been doing that for years.
Paul Guglielmo, my guest. We're going to talk about three interesting things today. We're going to talk, as you know, he is a radio personality, does podcasts here weekly in Conneaut as well. He also is the owner of Guglielmo Sauce. We're going to get into that. And then talk about a year he spent in Italy, back, maybe 18 years ago or so. I think 1999, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. Yep.
I spent a whole school year there. So we'll talk about all those three things. Let's talk about radio first.
Sure.
Paul, you landed in Rochester when?
I moved to Rochester on October 1st, 2007. I had worked a couple of years prior to that at the radio stations in Ashtabula, Ohio, when they were owned by Clear Channel Radio. Moved to Rochester, I transferred my employment. The radio stations in Ashtabula had an ownership change, and I stayed with the company. I stayed with Clear Channel Radio, but of course, because they were then out at Ashtabula, I had to move in order to stay with the company, and that landed me in Rochester. I was unfamiliar with the state of New York because I knew New York City, I knew the Buffalo Bills, I knew Syracuse. I didn't know where Rochester was. It turns out Rochester is the third biggest city in New York.
Is that right?
Behind New York City and Buffalo. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I first saw Rochester, because when I saw Rochester, I already knew I was moving there. I agreed to move there before I ever even saw it, which was nerve-wracking. But getting there, seeing the city, recognizing it as a big city. It's smaller than Cleveland, but bigger than Erie. So if that kind of puts it in perspective to you, it's a small big city or a big small city. Either way you want to look at it, it's one of those.
You're kind of versatile. It's iHeartRadio now in Rochester, right?
Yeah, so Clear Channel Radio rebranded. It's still the same company, but they rebranded and renamed themselves iHeartMedia because the idea was, radio is not necessarily what we do anymore. Of course, we are still a radio station. We're still on the FM airwaves, but it has sort of transformed into content creation now. That's the way we look at it. It's sort of just a different way that radio has gone over the years as more and more competition has come out. Smartphones I should say, have brought so many different avenues for you to find entertainment. We are constantly having to create new content in order to remain dominant in the medium.
We should do multiple things for that radio station. You're a DJ. You have a food and wine show. You also have a community talk show. Talk about those three things. What do you like the best?
That's a really good question. I mean, the bread and butter is still the morning show. I'm lucky enough to be on a show that is a morning talk show, meaning we don't play any music, so it's 5 hours of content creation every day.
Is that local talk?
I would say it's anything goes. We certainly definitely try to stay local, because just back to the more and more competition than ever, people can listen on their smartphones to Spotify, they can go to Pandora. The one thing that Pandora cannot do for you is talk about what's happening right down the street. And that is one thing we have to really flex that muscle. And remind you that we are in your community. So we do concentrate on local. That being said, if there's national topics, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk sports. Not going to like hearing this, but it's Yankee territory. So every day, especially this time of year, I got to wake up and hear about the Yankees. And part of my job is to pull the highlights on the Yankees. I have to pull all the Yankees and all the Mets highlights every morning. And it's torture, quite frankly.
People actually still want to hear Met highlights?
The highlights at this point for the Yankees, and this is, I don't know if you want to get into sports at all, but it's unfortunate because Yankees games are essentially home run derbies. It's going to be tough. I want the Indians. I'm obviously a huge Indians fan, and I look forward to a postseason, knock on wood. But man, if they go, whoever ends up against the Yankees in the postseason, they are dangerous because they'll be quiet for a few innings, but then all of a sudden it's just bomb, bomb, bomb. Scary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How can people in your hometown of Conneaut hear your community talk show?
That's the good thing, again, about the day we live in. I mentioned the smartphone. Well, we take advantage of that, too. There's an app called iHeartRadio. It's very similar to Pandora or Spotify. iHeartRadio is an app where you can create your own music radio stations, or you can listen to real radio stations from around the country. And as well on there, you can listen to podcasts, and you can listen to on-demand programs. So we take our morning show every day. We put it up on demand. The name of the show is The Brother Wease Show. Brother Wease, W-E-A-S-E. He's the host of the show that I'm on. There's 3 of us on the show. It's Brother Wease, who's a 35-year veteran on the radio. There's a female co-host and a male co-host. And so it's a triangle, basically, of the 3 of us. And I'm the male co-host. And that's that show. Then there's another show I do where I interview entrepreneurs. And that is a show that airs once a week for an hour on a radio station called Wham 1180, very similar to WTAM in Cleveland. That also is on demand on the iHeartRadio app if you type in Wham 1180 or Food and Wine Show. Or you can always just type in my name and you'll find my stuff.
On the Brother Wee Show, which is 4 hours in the morning?
It's actually 5 hours.
5 hours.
Yep.
Of course, you take phone calls. How do you handle an irate phone caller?
It happens, man. You know what? There is no rule. You got to kind of go with it. I'll tell you one thing that doesn't make great radio is circular arguments. So if somebody is irate, they're typically calling in with a point. You will either counterpoint, you'll argue it. Maybe you'll win. Maybe the caller will win. I don't know. Maybe nobody will win. You'll have to agree to disagree. What you want to try to avoid is a circular argument. So they make their point, you counterpoint, then they make the same point, then you counterpoint again, and then they continue to... And that can happen. And then when you find yourself in that kind of circular argument, that's when it's really time to move on. So an irate caller will typically end up in a circular argument, and it happens. And I think sometimes it can be good radio. It shouldn't always... We like to mix not only topics, but mix emotions. We like to have some very light, very fun, very happy topics. We like to talk sports. And we like to, occasionally get very serious as well and talk about very serious topics. And I think a good mix of all that content, much like Around Town with Chuck, I don't have to tell you this, that's what you do on your show. I think that's what makes for good entertainment.
When you get that irate caller,
Yeah.
like you said, and you have your view, they have their view, who usually gets the last word before you go to the next caller?
Well, I'm going to tell you about a radio trick right now that I will tell you right now. I do not do this, and neither does our host on our show, Brother Wease. But I'll tell you about sometimes when you're listening to political talk radio, who gets the last word? I'll tell you how it works. See, in front of us, we have a little control board that has all the phone calls on it. And we can see what the phone calls are. And let's say I plunk down on that phone call, and it's an irate caller who disagrees with me. What they can do is they can yell at me, and then I'll counterpoint back at them. Then and then what I do is I decide I want the last word. And I hold all the power because I have that button.
Absolutely.
So as I start to make the point, I hang up on them. While I'm talking, making my point, point made, silence. No answer to that, huh? Moving on. But I hung up. He's probably on the other end of the phone going, but I hung up. I will tell you I've never actually done that, but I know plenty of radio hosts that do. It's a dirty trick.
Anything else in the radio world, Paul, that you haven't accomplished that you want to, that's on the horizon that you want to accomplish?
Yeah, sure. I mean, with Brother Wease Brother Wease has been on the air for a very long time. He's nearing retirement, and one day he may retire. And when he does, I'd like a crack at being in the host chair. I do get the opportunity to be the host on other shows, and also when Brother Weeze is off on vacation, I get to be the host of the show. But maybe having a show with my own name on it in Morning Drive, that would be a really cool thing. If it comes true, great. If it doesn't, luckily I've given myself a few other avenues in life, places I could go that would also take me places I'd be interested in going. So I'd like to see that happen. If it doesn't, it's okay. I'll adjust.
You bring your talents to Conneaut in Ashtabula County in a weekly podcast that you do. I think you're like well over 200 episodes now.
Yeah.
What gave you the idea, and what kind of a feedback are you getting from it?
Honestly, I think you and my mom gave me the idea, if I remember right. I was doing this podcast. I had always done daily episodes of a podcast. About 2010 or so, my company started to realize that this new thing was coming called podcasts. Now, podcasts are something most people have heard of and a lot of people listen to. And they're very popular and everyone knows about podcasts. In 2010, it was something people had heard of, and they didn't quite know, how do I do that? Where do I find a podcast? What do I do? So we started being mandated that we had to all do a podcast every day. So I started doing it. And it went fine. And I was looking for different topics. And I think you guys suggested, what about one where you just do Conneaut? Well, couple that with the fact that Conneaut really doesn't have that. Conneaut, even Ashtabula County in general, doesn't have a talk show that really concentrates on this area. Cleveland has some talk shows. I think Erie has talk shows, but Ashtabula County doesn't have one of their own. There's some media going on here, but that's dying and slowly going away, and there's music radio, I think, still based in this county, but there's not talk, there's not topical conversation. And so I saw that as an opportunity to maybe do that. Now, when I say a talk show, I'm only doing about 20 minutes a week. It's not like I'm doing hours and hours, because it is Ashtabula County, and quite frankly... You're doing headlines. I'm doing headlines. There's not quite as much news as you might think there would be. There's not as much news in Ashtabula County as there is in Cleveland. And so for that, on later news days, I'll make sure to mix in some talk about Cleveland sports, or maybe even go into Lake County and Cuyahoga County for news. The thing is, I think I just felt like local topical conversation was slightly underserved. And the feedback I'm getting on it is pretty good. It gets a lot of clicks. It gets more clicks than I thought it would get. I thought when I first started that it would get like 7 listens, and it's not. It's getting hundreds, which is cool. And I think for this area, hundreds is fine. I think hundreds would be considered a low number if I was doing this in a bigger city. But for Conneaut, hundreds of people listening to a podcast that's pretty good. I can live with that.
And what I think is pretty cool lately, you've been interviewing some people, especially politicians running for local.
Yes, it was for city council president, right? I had the opportunity to have both Debbie Newcomb on and Eugene Emery on, and they were running against each other. And I thought that Eugene, with zero experience, had really gave her a bit of a run for her money, didn't he?
Closer than a lot of people thought.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, because there's a difference. Because and I'm a fan of both of theirs in certain ways. I think Debbie's a seasoned veteran and someone you can trust in that seat to at least keep the status quo, if not improve slightly. I think Eugene would have been interesting, because I think that Eugene, without the experience, that's the negative, right? That's the weakness. He doesn't have the experience, but not having experience would probably be more willing to make some drastic moves and drastic changes. We're seeing that right now, and I know you don't want to go down this road, but we're seeing that in the presidency, right? Say what you want to say, positive or negative. There's been drastic things that have happened and some changes, and you can argue all you want if they've been positive or negative, but at the end of the day, a lot of people sit in their homes, in their living rooms, and they say, we want change this, change that, and a lot of experienced politicians are a little hesitant to that. You get somebody in there with no experience and they have that same attitude. Let's change it all. And you're seeing that with Trump. I think you would have seen that with Eugene. It's fascinating. Would have been fascinating.
I think you do a great job in your radio personality, and I think you're only going to get better and better.
I hope.
My viewing audience has got a chance to see that when you're actually going to host this show, interviewing a very special guest on a very special topic in a couple of weeks.
Very excited.
Let's move on to segment number 2. Okay. In your junior year at Conneaut High School, you decided you were going to become a foreign exchange student, and you spent the entire year in Italy and living with 3 different families.
Yeah.
First of all, why did you want to do that? And second of all, what was the culture like and how did the families differ?
The decision came from, I grew up as an American Italian. I grew up with, obviously, you as my father being American Italian. My grandfather, Pete, was an Italian American. He was born in America, but to Italian immigrants. And then my great-grandparents, who I never met, were Italian. So I was the first sort of full-blooded, just American. And so I was very, very fascinated by our heritage and the background and Italy in general and what could, origin stories have always fascinated me. In fact, back to radio just for a moment, you'll notice a lot of my interviews, I always start with your origin story. Where did you come from? What were you doing before the thing that we know you for, right? And that's always fascinated me. So I wanted to see the origin story of my own family and go back and see where it originated. Let's go back and see Italy. So I had heard, I remember there was an assembly. I was in the 10th grade, and there was this assembly, and the assembly topic was, would you like to go study in another country? And like 400 kids showed up, or I don't know if Conneaut High School is that big. Like 90 kids showed up, whatever. The gym was full. Garcia Gymnasium was full. And somebody spoke about being an exchange student. And at the end of the 20 minutes, now everyone showed up because sounds like a free vacation, and also because you don't have to go to social studies if you show up to this assembly, right? So everyone shows up, and after, everyone just goes right back to class, and I think about 5 of us maybe stuck around for more information. And I got the packet, I brought it home, and I think I told you guys I was pretty serious about it. It was a Rotary organized thing, which I'm proud to say now I'm a Rotarian in Rochester, so I'm excited to have finally, the whole thing has come full circle now. I'm helping other people give service. But anyway, I think what happened was it was sort of the same way when I started my business. It was just sort of a step-by-step. We filled out the application to see if we'd make it to the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step, and it just kept on being like, how serious are you, Paul? And me saying, I'm serious, let's take that next step. And then eventually we got to the point where they were like, well, time to buy your plane ticket. And if I remember correctly, I think the night before you guys had to pay for the plane ticket, because I was 16, okay, they paid for it for me. I think it was a bit of a talk. I think that maybe a local family came over and said, once you pay for this, that makes it sort of official. And I remember me just saying, yeah, I'm going. I even remember a kid coming up to me, a buddy of mine, coming up to me and telling me, why are you pretending like you're going to go to another country? You're not going to go to another country. That's all you need, that's all you need to hear is someone challenge you and say, you're not going to do that. It's like, oh, I'm going to do it. I'll tell you off the air who it was. And because now he's an attorney, that guy. But anyway, I went through with it. You bought the plane ticket for me. I went to orientation. And then I remember having to go to orientation in, wasn't it somewhere in Central, it might have been Columbus or something like that. Or we had to go to orientation somewhere in Ohio.
Yeah,
all the Ohio exchange students went to one place, and it was a couple-hour drive, and it was a one-night stay. It was like we got there on a Saturday morning, and we left on a Sunday afternoon, and this was before I went to Italy. And I remember that night freaking out a little bit, being a little scared, just being one night in Central Ohio. I'm like, man, I'm 2 hours from home, and I feel like I'm far from home. How am I going to do this when I'm in another country, thousands of miles away, without being able to speak the language? But I knew that I couldn't turn back. I knew that it was something that, the way I see it, if you're comfortable, you're not growing. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to be pushing yourself in order to grow and improve in life. You are not growing and improving unless you are putting yourself in situations where you are a little out of your element and a little out of the... And then what happens is if you do that over and over and over, it becomes normal to you. And now all of a sudden, that is your element and you are comfortable within that. And now you take the next step, and that's how you grow in life, right? And so that was how I saw it. And so I went to Italy, and I lived there for 1 year. I lived with 3 different families. There was a bit of an effort to make it 3 different socioeconomic classes. They didn't put me with anyone who was in poverty or anything like that, but they did put me with a very well-to-do family. That was the first family.
How long were you with these families?
About 3.5 months each. Or 4 months or something like that. I think I was there for 11 total months. So it was like 3.5 months or so. And the first family I was with, I had my own bedroom. I had a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea.
Wow.
At the age of 16.
Wow.
and I lived in a bedroom with a balcony on a mountaintop overlooking the Mediterranean Sea at the age of 16. I mean, this was jackpot, right? This was amazing. And I had my own like wing of this home. I mean, I had my own hallway and bathroom and like playroom and then like bedroom. The second family I lived with was I think the lower of the three socioeconomic classes, but again, not poverty. I mean, we lived in an apartment. I shared a room in this case. And my window view was of another building, you know, so it changed a little. And then my third family was sort of middle. They were entrepreneurs, they were business owners. They owned a hotel down by the water. As I mentioned, I lived near the sea there, and they were hardworking people. They made a good living, but they whereas the first family I lived with had owned a chain of jewelry stores. They were a little bit more upper class and sort of, you know, well off. The third family I lived with were they were well off, but they were hard working. They were gone all day, every day working. And so I got to see that too. So they really made a good job of making sure I saw everything. What I took away was when I first went to Italy, it was like being on a vacation. It was beautiful. It was interesting. The food, of course, is amazing in Italy. What I found after being there for about 11 months was that while I don't regret it at all, and while I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, and while the experience was wonderful, what I learned is after a while, you're not on vacation anymore. That wears off after a few weeks, the vacation feeling. Now you're living your life. I had to go to school. I had to get along with the other kids. For a little while, you're not shiny and new anymore. You're not the tourist. You're not the American. You're not the exchange student. Now you're just Pool, as they would call me. Pool, they would pronounce it. Now you're just Pool. And you start to realize that even though it's Italy and it's this exotic paradise, right? They're still just people living their lives, trying very hard to get along with each other. They're married, they're children, they have children, their children have parents. They're just normal people. And what it did was it helped me, because before that I had always been very intimidated by other people. I'd always thought maybe other people were living these perfect lives, and why wasn't I perfect? Why don't I have the confidence that person has? And you realize that everybody struggles with something, you know, and it kind of put me in that was my best takeaway.
What kind of discipline life did these families have for you? What were they expecting from you, discipline-wise?
You know, what was great, which I can admit now because the statute of limitations on report cards is up, I'm hoping at this point, was that I had to go to school, but I didn't really have to try in school. It was more about culture. The whole point was, I know, right? The whole point was they wanted me to immerse myself in culture. This was about learning culture. This wasn't about learning geometry. This was about learning culture. So I didn't, if there was geometry class or something, I didn't have to go to class and learn geometry. They just wanted me to learn culture. So a lot of times I would go to school, check in, find out what was on tap for the day, and if there was going to be a geometry lesson, I wouldn't go to class. I would go down and work with the cafeteria workers, or I would take lunch orders and go to the restaurant and pick up the lunch order. Or I would, you know, this myriad of different things that I would do just to sort of like, because for me it was more about learning the culture, learning how to speak Italian, and getting along with people. One of the things that will blow your mind about what school was like in Italy.
That's what I want to hear.
A couple of things that'll blow your mind.
They also went on a Saturday, didn't they?
Yes, that was one of the things I was going to say. 6 days a week, but slightly shorter days. I think the school day was like 9 to 1:30. So, you know, 4.5 hours, so which is a lot shorter, but it was 6 days a week, which was, that was a little intimidating, the 6 day a week thing. The other thing, that this will blow your mind on how loose they were. And again, this is 1999, so things may have changed, but in 1999, if you had brought a cigarette or alcohol onto the Conneaut High School grounds, suspension. In Italy, they kept a couple desks open near the windows, because if you needed to smoke, you could just raise your hand and ask if you could go to one of the smoking desks, and you could smoke during class because you were near the window. Also, as far as
that wasn't just Italy, that was all of Europe?
I think probably, I mean, I went to school in Italy, so I can only speak to Italy, but the other thing was, before break, like before Christmas break, they had the whole school was just a party that day. It was just, you know, you go to school, there's no lessons, it's just a party. Do you know who supplied the alcohol, by the way, to teenagers? The teachers.
The
okay.
teachers. I was going to say the school.
The teachers brought in limoncello and mirto di Sardegna and l'acquavita, and it was like everything was just sort of like food and cheers for that entire last day of school. And that was stuff that if that happened in America, that would be like the end of that school would be shut down forever. It's crazy that was a thing, but I saw it with my own two eyes. It was amazing.
What was your favorite food over there?
I love these little things called pizza at this, which are just little, they would make this giant sort of sheet pizza, and then they would cut it into squares, and then they would fold it over, and then put it in a little paper thing and give it to you. But the very first thing I learned how to say in Italian, the very first sentence I learned how to put together was, un panino con prosciutto crudo per favore e una lattina di Coca-Cola.
Translate, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I got that.
Yeah.
I got everything. I didn't get anything until that last word.
The sentence, the first thing I learned is I would like a sandwich with prosciutto, please, and a can of Coca-Cola.
Wow.
That was my first thing because there was this after-school little place called Signor Moy's that all the kids would go to and get a snack. And I just found they would take like a hard roll, like a really nice roll that I think they probably baked right there on site if I remember correctly, and they would just take this big chunk of prosciutto and stick it on this soft roll and put it in a little thing, and then I would get a can of Coke and I would just eat this prosciutto sandwich, and that was my first sentence I learned how to say in Italy.
Didn't you tell me your first day there, they actually gave you an American meal? Like steak
Yeah,
and potatoes or something?
that's true. They did it a couple of times, but the day I arrived, they wanted me to feel comfortable. So they had steak and baked potatoes. And I lived on the island of Sardinia, so steak was I don't want to say it was impossible to come by, but it was very expensive, whereas seafood was a little bit, sort of opposite of here, right? Seafood was a little bit more because it was an island. That was more of the native dish, was anything seafood. And so I showed up as steak and potatoes, and they were so proud of themselves because they wanted me to feel at home. Meanwhile, all I wanted, my first day in Italy, I just wanted pasta, pizza, give me something Italian, right? And they gave me steak and potatoes. They also did it for me on the 4th of July.
That's right. I remember you telling me that.
So 4th of July obviously is not a holiday to them, but they're aware of it, and they know that we celebrate it. They know that it's a holiday in America. So on the 4th of July, they did hamburgers and hot dogs, but they had to special order because they didn't have hot dogs. So they ordered that, and then the burgers I remember that they made were they almost looked like meatballs. They were just these giant lumps of beef that they had gotten, and then they put a bunch of bread and cheese out, and they were like, hamburger, hot dog, full like America, 4th of July, it was really funny and cute that they did that.
Yeah, it was. One final thing on this before we move on to the final segment. Since you said school was very different, did you feel when you came back to Conneaut as your senior year, you were a little bit behind not having your normal subjects there?
It's not going to be a popular answer, but no, I felt pretty far ahead, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah, I was pretty aware even at that time. Okay, so back to just one thing I said, statute of limitations on report cards, let me pay that off. Basically, at the end of the school year in Italy, I had to meet with the principal. Had almost like a job interview with the principal in Italy, where for about 10 or 15 minutes, the principal asked me about what I had learned and how I had spent my year. And I had all these classes I had to take that were required for 11th grade, things like geography and geometry, and he had to rate me on these. And he had found out that I needed I think that they wanted me to maintain a B average. And so after talking to me for 15 minutes, he just went through and wrote 8, 8, 8, which is a B, 8, right? Just went through on the report card, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, stamped it and handed it to me. I never took a single test that whole year. I never took geometry, never passed geometry. I got a B in it if you look at my high school transcript. I don't think I've ever I don't even know what geometry is to this day, right? I have no idea. I think it's shapes or something. I don't know how they add shapes, but whatever. Never took it. German, I got a B in German. I don't know how to say anything other than one curse word in German, right? But I had to take a foreign language, so they gave me a B in German. And when I came back to America, I had missed out on geometry. I had missed out on German, okay? But I had missed out on, geometry and whatever, a couple other topics. And so you asked me if I felt like I was behind at all. No, because I was aware even at the age of 17 that what I needed as a skill to get through life was people. I needed to be able to navigate my way around people and have relationships, meaningful, deep relationships with as many people as possible in as many industries as possible. And I had spent the last year perfecting that ability, and my friends had learned geometry, which to this day I doubt they use ever. You know what I mean?
Obviously, you had a great experience in Italy, to say the least.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move into our final segment.
And if there's any geometry teachers watching, I'm sorry, but I don't know what it is.
Our final segment here, 2014, I believe it was. You launched a business, pasta sauces.
Yep.
August of 2014.
August 9th, 2014.
Yes, and how has it blossomed through the years?
So this is great doing an interview in Ohio because typically we do over 99% of our business in New York State. And so I always have to describe who my grandfather was and where this idea came from. But the great thing about doing an interview in Ohio is I think a lot of people watching this probably knew my grandfather. They knew Pete Guglielmo, Chuck's father. So I don't have to give you as much background on Pete as I normally would, right? But he was this sort of this local, just beloved old Italian man. I don't know how else to put it. He was loud, but he was loving, and he was just all welcoming. Everyone was welcome. Everyone knew Pete. Most people had interacted with him at some point or another. And when I moved to Rochester, I missed him a lot. I missed you, I missed Mom, I missed my brother, and I missed my grandfather. Those were the things I missed more than anything. So one of the things I knew I wanted to do when I got to Rochester was make sauce on Sundays. Very simply. That was it. Just wanted to make sauce on Sundays. And at first, I moved to Rochester, I didn't know a soul. So at first, I was making a pot of sauce on Sundays and eating it myself. It was just me, you know. Then slowly, I made a couple of friends, and I would invite a friend or two over on Sundays. And then slowly but surely, you know, over the course of the years, then eventually I met my wife. She became my girlfriend, obviously, and then I would invite her, and then her friends, and then her family. And then as I've gotten married and started a family, that's become, now Sundays at my house have become very much so what they were like at my grandfather's house when I was young. And that is, I am so proud of that. Well, my position in radio helped because the sauce would come up all the time in conversation. And what would happen is people would ask me where, you know, how can I try that sauce? Paulie, would you make me sauce? And I remember one day on a Monday, I had brought in leftover sauce from the day before, and everyone on the show ate it, and they were talking about how good it was. And then somebody on the show, I think it was Weeze himself, turned to me and said, well, why don't you jar it, bro? Put it in a jar, you know, put this stuff in a jar and put it out into the world. And I remember thinking, that sounds impossible. You can't do that. And we have live texting and emailing and calling on our show. And I remember getting 22 emails, not 21, not 23, 22 exactly emails from people saying, Paul, was listening to the show this morning. Just wanted to let you know, if you ever did jar your sauce, I would buy it. And I remember having my first thought of, so if I made 22 jars of sauce for these 22 people, and just sold it to them for $1 more than me, I could make $22. I could go to Wegmans tonight, our local grocery store. I could go to Golden Dawn tonight, and I could buy myself dinner. And the sauce would have paid for that. I wonder if there's something to this idea. So I did. And I'll tell you the truth. Also, I just Googled it. I Googled, how do you take a home recipe and turn it into a commercial recipe? Found a laboratory that helps you get your recipe approved. And took it from there and went one step at a time. The same way as the Italy thing. It was taking one step to see if I could make it to the next step, to see if I could make it to the next step, to see if and so on and so forth until we got to the point where it was a reality and it existed. And then from there, again, as I mentioned, getting lucky, I just got very, very lucky. And what happened was a few stores picked it up. And then a few more stores picked it up, and a few more stores picked it up. And we got to the point where, to this day, we're in over 400 stores with that sauce.
That's incredible. Now, you started with two sauces, marinara and marinara with sausage, your traditional sauces, right?
Yeah.
And now you're up to what, 8, 9, 10 types?
We've created 10 different recipes at this point. We have 9 that are being manufactured annually. Some of them are seasonal, depending on when and where we can get ingredients and when we want to put the ingredients out. So like, for example, in the fall, we do a pumpkin sauce. Pumpkin sauce maybe wouldn't go out quite as well in, March. So we do that in the fall. In the summer, we do a fresh tomato basil sauce, which is intended to be sort of straight out of the garden. And we don't put that out in the summer. That's a little bit more of that requires a little bit more of a fresh feel to it. And I want to use a certain tomato for that.
You have a pizza sauce
We
out.
have a pizza sauce out.
You got some breaking news coming up?
I have some breaking news.
For the local people
I think
here?
I can talk about this. I think I'm allowed to talk.
Why don't we close the show talking about this breaking
I'm not
news?
even sure. I don't even know for a fact if I'm allowed to talk about this, but I think I can.
It's up to you.
But basically, JD's Pizza here in Conneaut has recently started using Guglielmo's pizza sauce. And where it stands right now is that they have agreed to use a certain amount of it, see how it goes, and if it goes well, as long as people like it, that they will switch over and make it their official sauce. But they took, a significant amount of sauce and are planning on rolling it out, I think, for a little while to gain public feedback and then make a decision over the next couple of weeks. So buy JD's Pizza and call and tell them, hey, there's something different about this that makes it fantastic. It was good before, but it's even better now. Is it the sauce? Do that for me. That would be awesome. Please.
How was that pizza sauce you had last night?
It was fine. It was not Guglielmo's.
Great job. Oh, one more final question. Of all your sauces, which ones are the biggest sells in your area?
The biggest sell, and I'm so proud of this, is still that original. Still Grandpa's original recipe, that marinara sauce. The Italian sausage and the vegetarian version, we do the marinara. Those are still our two big ones, and I'm very proud of that because that was Grandpa's recipe. So.
Great job. Thanks for joining me.
You did okay too, Chuck. You did
Appreciate
good.
that. Paul Guglielmo, my son, my guest on Around the Town with Chuck.